Hey everyone, Nick Marzinski here at TrappingLight.com, and today I want to talk about text layers. If you're using Photoshop or Photoshop Elements just to retouch pictures, you're probably not terribly familiar with text layers. However, if you're going to design a holiday card or a scrapbooking page, then having text as a tool that you can work with is probably going to be pretty important. So let's talk about how to do that. The first thing that's important to know about text layers is that they don't behave like photo layers do in Photoshop. Photo layers, like the one I've got here of my daughter, are what's known as raster layers, meaning that they're made up of pixels. And whenever you distort pixels in Photoshop, you introduce the possibility of damaging your image. Here's an example. I'm going to take this image here and I'm going to use free transform to just make it as small as I can. Just make it really, really small. And I'm going to commit to the change by pressing the checkbox up here. Then, let's say later on I want to come back and expand the image back to its original size. So again, it's a free transform and I'm just going to drag it up. And what you can see right here is that the image has a total loss of quality. Even when I click the checkbox and Photoshop tries to interpolate image data, you can still see that this image looks nowhere as good as my original image back here. There's a significant drop of quality, and that's because these layers are raster layers. They're made up of pixels, and Photoshop will get rid of and introduce pixels as it needs to when you resize things. Text layers don't behave that way. Text layers are what's known as vector layers, meaning that they're made up of points and paths. Basically, a text component is like a big connect the dots puzzle that turns into a letter. Okay? And because text layers aren't pixel based, they can be resized, manipulated, and distorted without ever sacrificing any image quality. Furthermore, they're also continuously re-editable, which makes them very, very powerful, and we'll get into in just a minute. Now, the second thing that's important to know about text layers is that they really come in two flavors. There's a point and paragraph. Here in Photoshop, I've got the horizontal type tool selected right here from my toolbar on the side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my cursor on the image and I'm going to click. And you can see that it gives me a cursor, and I can just start typing. Now, this is what's known as a point text layer, meaning that it's just one point that I start off with, and if I want to switch to, say, a new line, all I have to do is hit the enter button. Okay? And this works, and it's great for a lot of uses, and when I'm done, I just click the checkbox up here. It's great for a lot of uses, but let's say that we want to place a block of text into our document. Now, the problem with using a point text layer like I just did here is that if we ever want to resize the text or change the font, then the line breaks that we've added using that enter key won't ever change, and so they may no longer look good with the new arrangement of text. Because of that, Photoshop has a second kind of text layer called the paragraph text layer. Again, I'm still using the horizontal type tool. I haven't changed anything. However, when I go onto my document, instead of just clicking, I'm going to click and drag, and you'll see that it makes a box. When I've got the box the size that I want it for my text box, I'm just going to release, and again, Photoshop will keep the box formed and will give me a blinking cursor here. Now, in this case, I'm just going to simply fill it with gibberish with this lorem ipsum here, just to give you a sense of what you have. In every case here, when it gets to the edge of the box here, it's going to go to the new line. It doesn't need you to press enter. Okay, it works almost like a word processor. Furthermore, if you decide that you want to change the size of this text box by grabbing one of the anchors at the side, what you can see is that Photoshop will automatically redo the line breaks based off of the size of the box. Okay? And that's really, really good, again, for putting together text boxes where you want a whole huge block of text. Okay? Now, in this case, what you can see is that I've created two text layers, and they're both right here in the layer stack. This is the layer 3 right here, which is the paragraph form, and this is the second layer, which is the point form. Okay. Now, like I mentioned before, text boxes are continuously editable. So if I ever want to change anything, in order to do that, all I have to do is click on the T right here in the layers palette. And you can see, in this case, it's highlighted this text. Now, if I want to, say, change the font, I can go in here and change it to whatever I want, and I can take care of that right on the fly. and Photoshop will change the font. However, I've got a lot of font choices right here, and sometimes I don't want to go through and look at each one, right here and click and click and click, and they do provide samples, but these samples are really small and difficult to see. So what I can do is, while this text layer is highlighted, when I clicked on that little T over here, I can click in here, right like that, and then using my up and down arrow keys, Photoshop will automatically apply different fonts right to my text layer. And when I find one I want, then great, I'm done. I can also change the size of it, italic, bold, and that sort of thing, as well as the font, or the size of the text. Now, this is a scrubby slider, so all I've got to do is put my cursor over the T right here, and you'll see it changes to a hand with a left and right arrow. By clicking and dragging, I can make my text larger and smaller. Again, I've made my text small, I enlarge it, and I have no loss of image quality because it's that vector layer. In addition, if I only want to apply it to a certain portion of my image or change to a certain portion, I can just simply highlight the portion that I want and then increase the size, and it will only work on that particular part of the text. Okay? And then finally, I can use a color picker to make my text whatever kind of color I want. I can commit to the change. Then when I'm done, I can go to the Move tool. I can use the Move tool to resize my text. I can use it to turn my text and rotate my text, all that sort of stuff, and then commit to changes. Furthermore, right within the text tool here, if I've got this text layer selected, you can see that there's this T item right here. If I click on this, I can apply all sorts of warped effects to my text, or to my text layer. So I can make it look like a flag. I can do an arc. I can do an arch or a bulge or all sorts of things. And again, because it's a vector layer, all of these edits are completely reversible and non-destructive. Now that I've done that, let's say that I want to turn my text into a raster layer. Okay? That is, what I'm going to be doing is taking the text that consists of points and lines and turning it into actual pixels. Now, after talking about how great vector layers are because you can resize them and you can distort them and you can make all these edits to them without damaging the pixels, you may be thinking, why on earth would you ever want to do that? Because then your edits start being destructive. There's no good reason for you to want to do that. Well, hear me out here, because I do have a point. See, there's a few edits that you can't make to text layers. Let's take filters or gradients. Let's say that I want to blur this image, this text layer right here. So I've got the text layer. It says this is a new text layer, this is a new line, and I want to blur it. So I go up to Filter, I go to Blur, and I go to Gaussian Blur, and I click on it. And what you see is that it says Photoshop is telling me this type layer has to be rasterized before proceeding. Because it's a vector image, you can't apply these types of effects to that vector layer without changing it into a raster layer. And so that's what Photoshop is telling you here, and then it's asking you, do you want to rasterize the type? In this case, I'm not going to want to, because I want to show you how to do it without having to resort to going to a filter. If you right click on the layer, you can see right up here that it says rasterize type. Now, I'm not going to click it, and the reason why is because if I click it, then it's going to rasterize this type, and I don't have a way to get back to my original text layer. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this text layer by dragging it down or hitting Control J, and then I'm going to hide one of the versions of it. And the reason why I'm going to do that is so that I've always got this version to come back to. I've always got this text layer to come back to. Now on this other one, then I can right click on it and click rasterize type. At this point, if I want to apply a blur, say, I can go to Blur, go to Gaussian Blur, and then blur the text, and you can see exactly what it's doing to the text layer right here. Is really blurring it, or whatever. The other thing that I can do, which is a pretty cool effect, is I can apply a gradient. Again, right here, what you see is that it's changed now. It's no longer a T. It's actually image data that you've got here. So let's say that I want to apply a gradient to it. I want to have the color gradually shift from one color to another color on the text layer. I'm going to grab my gradient tool right over here and come up here to my gradient editor, and white to black sounds fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drag from one side of the text layer to the other. So I'm going to start here and just drag across, and watch what happens. It applies it to the entire image. Now, that's not what we want to do, so we're going to undo that change. And the problem is that if we take a look at this layer and just this layer by holding down the Alt or Option key and clicking the button, you can see that what this layer actually is it's the text that we've got here, as well as the checkerboard pattern, which means that there is no image data there. It's basically a transparent layer. Okay? And that's fine, but what we want when we apply a gradient is we want it to apply to the text layer, but we want it to completely ignore the transparency layer. And the way to do that, up here in the layers palette, you can see this lock, and right next to the lock there's this little checkerboard pattern here which says lock transparent pixels. If I click that, and I'm going to actually unhide my layers by holding down the Alt key and then clicking right back on it. If I click that on this layer, you can see that it puts up a lock right here. At that point, the transparent pixels on just that layer are locked. Now if I apply my gradient, come across and go draw my line, you can see that it applies the gradient simply to that text layer, and that's all. It doesn't touch the underlying pixels because we've locked them out. Okay? So that's some really quick and simple tools that you can use with text layers. Now, there's one last thing that I want to show you, and this is just something that I worked out with text layers just to give you an idea. Okay? I'm going to start out with a blank document. This is the same one that I ended with at my prior tutorial, where it's one of the MPix documents where it's got the guides and everything, so you know where you're supposed to place text. And the very first thing that I did is I started off by just putting a text layer on, a point text layer. It says Jingle Bells, and rotating it. And that's it. That's what you get here. Now, I've gone over the edge of my boundary here, so this part is going to get clipped off, and I'm fine about doing that, and you'll see why in a little bit. Now that I added that, I decided to add a few other ones. Again, I just made them simple point layers and put them right on the same parallel to the one layer that I created before. So now what I've got is I've got this ribbon here. And again, I don't care. I talked about, getting this text cut off here. I don't care because at this point it's an image element. It's text, but I'm really making something that is almost artistic. Okay, so it doesn't bother me that some of this is going to get cut off, because that's fine. It's obviously happening already as it is, but we already know what it is. Now, once I got to this point, I looked at it and went, you know what, this kind of looks like a ribbon. And if I'm going to do a holiday card, that's kind of cool. So let me put another ribbon on there facing at a 90-degree angle. So I added a few more text boxes like that. Okay, now, again, I haven't done anything special. These are all just simply rotated point text boxes. Now I decided at this point, I've added ribbons. Now let's add something underneath it to make it look kind of like wrapping paper. So I wrote Happy Holidays as a paragraph text box, and I put it underneath. And this is what it looks like. Now this, to me, is too busy. All right, and the way to get rid of that is I used a layer mask, which you can see down here in the layers palette, which I'll enable here. And I masked it off of these other text layers that I've already created. Okay, even then I thought that it looked a bit too severe, so I rasterized it, made it a raster layer, and then applied a gradient to it, and then I got something that looks like this. And I'm going to disable the other layer right there so it gets rid of the stuff up here. This looks pretty good, but again, all this stuff right here is still a little busy, and what I wanted to do is I really wanted to call out at least one or two Happy Holidays at the bottom. And the way I did that is to create a new text layer with just one Happy Holidays lit up, and then I made it red. So you'll see it right down here at the bottom. And that's just a quick idea. It took me maybe 20-25 minutes to put all of that sort of stuff together pretty quickly. Now, the reason why I went through this, well, there's actually two reasons. The first is I wanted to just show you a potential way to work with text layers. More importantly, though, I wanted to also get you started thinking about typography, letters and words that are usually used to convey ideas, and how that can, with just a little effort, be an art form in its own right. So this is something that you can do very easily within Photoshop to create interesting art that doesn't even necessarily rely on images. It just relies on text and how we use text, and how you can create art with it. So anyway, that's it for now. I'll pick up with another tutorial later this week talking about clipping masks and how those work and how you can use them within a holiday card that you'd be creating. Until then, my name is Nick Marzinski with TrappingLight.com. Thanks.